Welcome, everyone.
Hi there.
It's great to see this many people in the room. Very exciting. And we have Orangevale Live and then the Zoom session, so we have people coming in remotely. Very excited to be able to share that with the technology. It's helpful with gives a lot more flexibility for folks that are perhaps can't get out of the house and those kind of things, so we're excited about that. Today, as part of the research team, I had been doing digging on various aspects of Orangevale, and one of the things that I was finding was there was this railroad that had run through, and there was a gentleman who had done a very detailed research and added me a YouTube channel video of the railroad line and all this stuff. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Lots of great details, and so we thought, well, it'd be a great speaker. So I reached out, and Kevin Knauss came, and he's willing to share with us. He is avid history buff, a lot of great research around local history. He's got a blog that has many, many great articles on various aspects of history around this area, Folsom Lake, different characters from back in the day, and he has 2 books. He's an author. His most recent is The Hidden History Beneath Folsom Lake, and Benjamin Norton Bugbee, Sacramento's Champagne King. Those are both available on Amazon and might be a good monthly book reading candidates for the book club. So with that, and no further ado, I'd like to bring Kevin up so he can share with us about the railroads.
Good evening. I am the honest to goodness speaker, and if you don't believe me, don't tell me. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Marilyn. Yeah, I do a lot of history because work sucks. So, and this area is just fascinating because we were ground zero, 1849. This was just raw land, and people started coming here and doing things. I mean, they didn't even get permission. They just started doing stuff. And it is our job to document the stuff they did, right, wrong, and indifferent. And going through the history of this area, there was a lot of urban myths and legends and whatnot. And people were always telling me, oh, there was a railroad. I said, well, where did it go? Well, they weren't sure. So I started doing some digging several years ago. And one of the first things I came across, what I thought was fascinating, and you've probably seen it, is, if I can point up, can I, oh, why don't you make it bigger, Kevin? Did that come, how come it's not coming up? There we go. It's a little bit better. So we have Orangevale up here in the corner. I don't want to get out of the screen. And there's a rail line going through there. And that's, when did that happen? And then the other thing is, why would you market land that had a railroad running through it? I don't know. But that was intriguing. And so I started doing some digging and ran into some other people. So Sacramento Valley Railroad, Charles Lincoln Wilson has the idea to build a railroad. He kind of incorporates that, gets it going around 1852. He goes back to New York to find an engineer for the railroad, and he lands on Theodore Judah, brings Judah and his wife Anna out to California, and Theodore Judah becomes the chief engineer. Now, there was a big vision back then to, and this was one of Judah's first maps, that it was going to, Sacramento would be connected with all the foothill communities because that's where all the activity was. That's where the gold was. You know, so we need to, get a railroad up there. So the big vision was to have a railroad go up to Negro Bar. That's what that area was called several years before it became Folsom, and then go on up towards the Bear River and the Yuba River and the Feather River. That was the big plan. So Judah had to set out, and you can see a lot of the stuff down at the California State Archives, and I have seen this particular profile, and he did a profile of the elevation from Sacramento to the different places. I won't show you the 60 long, it's about 60 foot long. It's huge, it's really cool. But here we go, the profile of Sacramento Valley Railroad. Charles Lincoln Wilson, president, and then Theodore Judah, chief engineer. But this one was particularly interesting because he's done a profile of the American River, and you can see how deep it is, and here's the line. So he knew that they were going to have to go across the American River. I don't know how many people are familiar with the halfway house there on Auburn Boulevard years and years ago, before they straightened it out and everything, but that's where the railroad went by. And that was in existence when Judah was doing his preliminary surveys. And of course, he marked it on there. And he marked other areas such as Secret Ravine right there before you get to Roseville. There was a couple different maps. They're not all of them around. The one map that exists of the Sacramento Valley Railroad, it's called the extension. So they got the Sacramento Valley Railroad to Folsom in about 1856. Folsom, I don't want to get too much into the background, but Folsom dies in 1855. That's why it was going to be Granite City. They renamed it in his honor. Folsom actually owned the big Leidesdorff land grant, and there was a cash crunch at the Sacramento Valley Railroad, and the people that had the most influence, Folsom and some other people, they pushed Charles Lincoln Wilson out. He was no longer involved. He was a shareholder, but he was no longer the day-to-day operations. So it was Judah and the other people that made the Sacramento Valley Railroad happen. And in 1856, it landed. They had the first early, I think it was like February 2nd, 1856. The train went from Sacramento out to Folsom. But there was still this vision to get across the river and go north. And that is what the extension map was. And this is, I put all this stuff on my website. So if you want to, you can download this map in a smaller version. This is the Orangevale Folsom area, but you can see it went all the way up, and they're going to cross the Bear River and going up to Marysville and Yuba. Now, it didn't happen. The Sacramento Valley Railroad did not continue forward. And this is where I need to do a little bit more research to find out exactly what happened. But Charles Lincoln Wilson, to his credit, I mean, he was the man that I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. And so he went and got more capital, more investors to invest in the California Central Railroad that was going to pick up where the Sacramento Valley Railroad ended there in Folsom and build a big bridge and continue on up. And of course, Lincoln, town of Lincoln, named after him, so you can kind of see where his ego was in all of this. Getting closer, because this map and another one is about the closest proximity we have to where the rail line went. But here you can see we've got the American River from Folsom. It was going to go over, and it would make this east-west and then head through, and I'm going to focus just on pretty much Orangevale and go through the Orangevale area. And here is the Sacramento-Placer County line. So that gets nice and flat over the flatlanders up there in Placer County. They issued stock. Now, this particular gentleman, I found this, this was kind of cool. You got to do some of this research and everything. And I was down, I'm writing a book about Amos Parmalee Catlin. And Catlin came to California in 1849, and he initiated the Natoma Canal. And he also organized the American River Water and Mining Company that kind of took over the management and the construction for the North Fork Ditch. He was a board of director for the Sacramento Valley Railroad. He was close with Judah. Matter of fact, he lent Judah $1,600 when Judah didn't have any work. And he also lent him some stock to keep going. But this is Mr. Catlin's, some of his shares for the California Central Railroad. And those were originals in his file down at the California State Library. There's actually quite a bit of information in his files on Judah. whole other story, but they were very close. So what is interesting, though, is the company was incorporated in Marysville. It wasn't local here. This is one of the, this is actually a toll charges for Judah, because we weren't really sure if Theodore Judah was in this area working with Wilson. We know that he kind of laid out, Judah laid out Folsom, and we knew he laid out the city of Lincoln, but we weren't sure what his involvement was, or at least I didn't know, in the California Central Railroad. And as I was investigating Catlin, more and more stuff is evolving about Judah right here in Orangevale. And there was a bridge that went across the American River, and of course it was a toll bridge. And so this is a statement for Judah, and this is from 1858. So they were building the railroad, and they were getting that bridge. They hadn't done the train bridge, but of course they could use the Kinsey Bridge. It was a wire bridge. Can you imagine walking over some of those wire bridges with the river going underneath you? Oh, geez. And so they would have to take things and take men across and do the cut and fill. Now, this is where I need your help, because I came across this letter and I do not know where this is at. This is to Theodore Judah, and it is the crew that's building the railroad, and they're informing him in 1859 that they've done all their work cutting, and after tomorrow we will have no work for our wheelbarrow gang with the road shall have been further laid out. They want guidance, and they're at the Lost Creek camp. Now, I don't know if that's Sacramento County or not. I know there's a Lost Creek road over there in American River Canyon. So, and of course, some of these creeks, they've changed names over time and whatnot. So maybe the Gold Rush Creek, as we call it, was Lost Creek. I don't know. If anyone happens to know old times where Lost Creek was, I would love to know, because then that would really tell us in October 12th, 1859, where that railroad was and how far it had gotten constructed. Because the railroads were built they were working in different parts, building the bridge and then doing the cut and the fills for the rail line. But by 1861, it's done. And so here we have that huge, massive trestle bridge. And this is Folsom. Down here would have been Negro Bar. Going across, and that's the California Central engine. Over here is that wire suspension bridge that Judah was taking the goods over. And just a beautiful, beautiful picture of the American River, and looks very similar today. This is another view. I haven't cleaned up the photo. I found this in the Library of Congress, probably around, maybe even taken by the same photographer. But we have our wire suspension bridge, was the Kinsey Bridge. And then we can see the railroad bridge behind it. And this is the suspension and railroad bridge over the American River at Folsom in Sacramento County. Now, on the other side of Folsom, there's many different names for that little community. It was known first as Big Gulch. And trivia, I don't know, when you come on to Greenback there off of Folsom, Auburn, it's nice and smooth. That's all fill. That was called Big Gulch. And if you've ever been at that Chevron station and go over and look at it, you can see how deep that gulch was. And I have Mr. Benjamin Norton Bugby, he mined at Big Gulch. And so there was a railroad bridge across the American River, but they had to put one across Big Gulch too to get across there. And then eventually they filled it in. But right there was Ashland Station. And they kind of developed the California Central. That's something I need to find out if they actually built Ashland Station, or Was it the other railroad, the Sacramento-Placer, Nevada Railroad from 1861 to about 1865 that started right there at Ashland Station and was supposed to go up to Auburn, but it never made it. That big barn was moved over to the Folsom Pioneer Village. So you can go to the Pioneer Village and see it, but that was on the other side. Of course, it didn't last, the bridges didn't last, and this is the old truss bridge that was installed. Here are the abutments right up there for the old railroad bridge, and of course all that's been knocked down, and we have the Rainbow Bridge that comes in right in around there right now. I'm not sure when this photo was taken, maybe 1890s or so. But the California Central, you know, they were advertising, and they talked about connecting with the Sacramento Valley Railroad, and you could leave Sacramento and you could go up to Lincoln, and you know, it wasn't, the economy wasn't what people thought it was going to be. There was a lot of misconceptions about how long the placer gold would hold out, and things had really slowed down. Plus, we're talking Civil War times, so things were really dampened. So they were having a tough time. All of the railroads were having a tough time, but they advertised, and people did regularly take the train, and there was freight. If anyone is into trains and railroads, these are the locomotive engines, the types, the drivers that Wilson had. 4 passenger cars, 16 freight cars, and 18.5 miles of track because it got up to Lincoln and just kind of stopped. He ran out of money too. Part of that was the Central Pacific started to strangle them. And as the Central Pacific came on, of course, Judah was involved in that and mapping that all out. As they made their way up towards Auburn with government money and government land. See, the Sacramento Valley Railroad, the California Central, that was private capital, and it was do or die. You know, we talk about the Chamber of Commerce. They were almost a small business comparative by today's standard. But the Central Pacific, you know, they were getting money from the federal government, and so it was just a different ball game. And it really put the squeeze on the Sacramento Valley Railroad and the California Central Railroad. And in 1864, they did do a map as they were making their way up towards Auburn. And this is probably one of the better maps of the California Central Railroad through the Orangevale area. Here's Folsom down here going across the river. I'm a map hound. I love maps. I was over, I've only been out of the country once, and it was over to London, and I clicked clocks, but in the clock shop had closed. But there was a map store, so I went in the map store and I said, "Hey, you got any California maps?" He goes, "Well, yes, sir, we do. Come over here." And he had this 1848 map of the gold fields. And it shows our area essentially, but it was of the American River, the North Fork, and the South Fork from 1848, and that's what Polk used to announce the gold discovery that brought out Catlin and Caldwell and all of those fun folks. The California was federal land. The only recognized titles were Mexican and Spanish land grants. All the men that were just doing their stuff, building railroads, building dams across rivers and water canals, they were doing it on federal land, and they didn't have a title. They didn't have clear title to what they were doing. A lot of the maps didn't come online from the federal government, the government land office. They were doing them in the 1850s, then the war broke out, and that slowed things down, and then a lot of stuff picked up in the 1860s. But what hinders us sometimes is this line right here, San Juan Land Grant. And oftentimes, well, the federal government did not map the land grant. They went through, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the public land survey system, where you have your townships and your ranges and your sections and your quarter sections. Maybe your grandparents or you owned a quarter section. And that's what all of that is based on. But the federal government did not map the land grants. So we are kind of without some technical data. But this is kind of the best one that I have found, and that was Central Pacific. And getting a little bit closer shot, comes over, the railroad comes just north of the American River on up and makes kind of a, and I'm going to get into kind of where this road was, because that's what you want to know. That's what you want to know. Whoops. Let me see. Okay, that's up to Roseville. So what one gentleman did is he took that Central Pacific Railroad map of 1864 and overlaid it on a USGS map that when they finally did start mapping, San Juan Line Grant was, well, actually it's kind of still there, but with all the roads. And I want to say this is the 53 or the 56 USGS map. And it's difficult because there's different, resolutions and sizes, but this gentleman did a pretty good job of getting this line on here. And I say pretty good job because I have been to many of the places where the railroad ran, and it lines up pretty darn good with the understanding that the railroads were built to be efficient and economize. So if they did not have to cross a creek, they wouldn't. They tried to minimize, tried to create a route that minimized the cutting of the dirt and the fill. So oftentimes they'd roll around drainage areas and creeks, and that's kind of what this shows right in here. This is an 1893 map, which isn't very good. We have this road here, and this is what's significant. Of course, we have Ashland. This is the Gold Rush, Gold Rush Creek. But the big thing is that line right there. That's Greenback. We have Greenback. I mean, they eventually would have cut it, right? But we have Greenback because of the California Central Railroad. Isn't it, when you think about it, it's just so nice and flat as you're traveling west. Now, the lower portion, that was added because they needed more length. But that was a big cut for the California Central. And, of course, we're enjoying that today. Thank you, Mr. Charles Lincoln Wilson. And of course, in 1893, they've got Orange Vale listed, the Vale listed on there. This is a cool picture because this no longer exists. I don't know how many people have been in this area for many, many years. And I want to say I remember this as a kid. I definitely remember going across the Orangevale Bridge. And I may have just dreamt this, but this was the Lincoln Cut. And because Greenback didn't really go through, you had to go up and around, pick up Orangevale Avenue over that bridge, and you had to go through this cut, the Lincoln Cut. You can see how high those sides were, and it was a curvilinear because it was coming off of Greenback, and then that's where it made the big turn to go northwest and over the creek. So that was, and I think this is about 1916. They're starting to pave the roads. I'm not sure when they knocked this all down, American River Canyon, probably in the 80s or maybe probably in the 70s. I'm not sure. That would be interesting to find out. This is an aerial view. I don't have it listed on there what the year is, but here's Greenback. Now we have the fill for the Gold Rush Creek because that was all open too. That's a pretty deep creek that comes in there right in around here. But you can see the railroad, Greenback would come, made this big curve and then up and over the Gold Rush Creek up there. So that is the rail line right there. Oh, and this is the bridge. This was several years ago. I took this picture before they updated the bridge. They did a nice job. They still kept it single lane, so kind of a suicide bridge. It was wooden until they redid it in concrete in 1915. The big bridge over the American River, that deteriorated fairly rapidly in one of the big storms. I believe it kind of fell apart by the late 1860s. The Central Pacific Railroad eventually bought the Sacramento Valley Railroad and the California Central in around 1865. They kind of kept it operating for a little bit, but really they wanted the rails to go do other things. They weren't really interested in the right-of-way because they wanted all of the traffic to go on their road. Another picture of the old road, but you can see how deep that gulch is right there. It's similar to Big Gulch. I don't know if there's any gold there, but now as you go up Orangevale Avenue, and then here is the cut that continues on that northwest section. This is about probably 1840s, 1850s, where that cut is, or this picture is for that cut. That's kind of, actually, it looks different even today. This is probably about 8 years ago, and that's what the cut looks like after it had been kind of grown over. And I don't know, I always see that lot for sale, and it sells, and someone's going to build something, but no one ever does. Maybe it's hexed or something. I don't know. It is very difficult to take pictures and show them because it doesn't. I found the right way, but the pictures just don't do it justice. But I have done as best as I can with the Google Earth and running the line in different areas. We know the red line. We know that very well because we can trace that green through Orangevale, yellow, and then I just kind of broke them up a little bit. So this is a better, closer view. We going across the American River, up to Ashland, down Greenback, going on the Lincoln Cut, and then up through the cut into, Canyon Laurel or something, I can't remember the name of it, and right up in there. So we know that's all good of the California Central. A little bit less sketchy because this is private property, so I don't walk across people's land. But this, curve is very close to the one that's on the Central Pacific map and the Sacramento Valley Extension map. And it looks like it follows fairly closely with the drainage area because Orangevale is kind of like a roller coaster, one that I would ride on. And so Judah was following a natural kind of drainage area before he picked up Linda Creek. And sometimes you can see, or at least I think I can see the old road bed when I go by Elm and then up by the park. Maybe I'm just imagining, I don't know. But the park, I have found the road bed there that goes through the park and would cut through, and then it would the rail line picked up Linda Creek. And now this is was that Woodbridge Ranch. So that's private property, so I didn't go wandering around there. This is a picture in Orangevale Park, and it is interesting. There is this long, it almost looks like a levee, a long mound, and it would have been piled up for the railroad because we do have. When we used to have rain in the area, there was a creek through there. So, you had to kind of elevate the railroad tracks a little bit. Otherwise, it was always going to be swamped. And you can see it. You can sight it. You can walk it. I mean, trees have kind of grown up, but you can follow it and you can see it. And it tracks very closely with all of the maps that we have right through there through Orangevale Park. I threw it out to the park department. Hey, you got a railroad here. You may want to, capitalize on that. They weren't interested, or maybe I don't know. Just went into the round file, and we can only do so much. This is at the halfway house, right there on Old Auburn, and where Old Auburn kind of hits Kirby and then makes the hard right around there. And there are foundations there. And I did talk to one of the property owners there, and I was able to look at his property, and you can kind of see the rail bed, and and they had some other artifacts, I believe, but went right through by the halfway house. And then it's interesting because it is a big line. The road would pick up South Kirby and come around and then hit and go through Linda Creek, and things have changed, but you could go to Linda Creek. That's a big greenbelt area, and it's easy to find the old road bed and walk on top of it and get across. Now, it's just the way the railroad has persisted is just really interesting. This is a map from 1910 on the water canals of the American River Water and Mining Company that was part of the Natoma Company. But even they showed the railroad, the California Central Railroad, and it had been defunct for years and years and years, but they still showed it. So probably whoever did the Orangevale map probably picked up on that and say, yeah, someday we're going to have light rail in here. Wouldn't that'd be interesting, light rail down to Sacramento. But that was 1910, so it was still around then. The Roseville community, Roseville Historical Society has put up a marker there on Folsom. Oh, that's one thing I wanted to, let me see if I can get back to it. Now, this is the intersection, the Spaghetti Bowl there at Douglas and Interstate 80. And that is Roseville Square. Remember going to Roseville Square? I mean, that was when I was a kid. Going to Roseville Square was like, yeah, I'm going someplace. The road went right through Roseville Square, and we know it did, because that road right there, from right before it hits, I guess that's Vernon, that's called Folsom Road. Because after they pulled up the rails, it became a road. It became a road to take into Folsom. So that's Folsom Road, and it runs right into the back of the shopping center, and everything just really lines up on that. So I have a high confidence level that is the railroad. So now, Orangevale Historical Society will get to put up their own markers about the railroad, right? And so there we go. The marketing of Orangevale, having a railroad through it. I'm not sure what they were thinking about when they put that together, but there it is. And now you know a little bit of the history, and it was done by 1868. So it did not run for very long, but it has a storied history to it, and many prominent people were involved with its construction and finance. Amos Catlin was elected a senator in 1852. Took a seat in 1853. He sponsored the legislation to move the state capital from Benicia to Sacramento in 1854. Why he wanted to leave Benicia, I don't know. But he got the capital here. He also was the attorney that litigated the Leidesdorff land grant before the U.S. Supreme Court, became a Superior Court judge, and he had a close relationship with Theodore Judah. Judah died in 1863 when he was going back to New York. He had a falling out with the Central Pacific Big Four, and but Catlin remained close to Anna Judah, and that's how he was able to acquire some of the Judah information that is in his boxes at the California State Library. So Catlin was involved with California Central. Catlin also bought a lot of property in Lincoln to support the California Central Railroad. And so he was involved in that, and there were many other men. So real interesting. So, I don't know if you'll be able to, capitalize on that at all, but it's very interesting. Questions? Because I think I've probably hit my time mark.
Oh, no, you're doing great. Let's see. Now, was there any central, I don't know if White Dog Farms is here. they actually had a few pieces of rail on their property left just there. They don't know if it was from this railroad or somebody just got some surplus rails. Is there any special stamping that we know of?
No, but it's going to be most of the rails that I have seen that people think maybe from the railroad are actually much smaller and were used more in mines for ore carts, because this would have been fairly substantial, not as big as the railroad ties that we see today, but fairly thick, fairly substantial. So, and most of those, that was valuable stuff, and it was carted off and used.
And was there I think I remember, was it a narrower gauge and they had to kind of convert
it? Was, yeah, that's a good question, and I wish Chuck Spinks was here. He's the expert on them. But yeah, you're right. It wasn't the standard gauge that was set for the Central Pacific, if my memory serves me correct. Yeah, so that it was a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Where do you find maps other than the internet, and what amount of information on the internet is available?
There's a lot. Where do you find maps? Some stuff is posted online. I post my stuff. It's the Center for Sacramento History. They have some maps there. That's where I found the American River Water and Mining 1910 map. Now, yeah, yes. Mm-hmm. And there's various, you just have to kind of move around. One interesting, I want to say, it's Government Land Office. Those were the original maps. And actually, before I came here, I really went back. Most of the government land maps in this area are from the 1850s, 1856, right before the California Central. And so it doesn't show up there. Later on, when they were mapping up near El Dorado County, they started doing that about 1865. And there are significant things of people's houses. And that's how I actually tripped into Benjamin Norton Bugbee, because on one of the old government land office maps, it said Benjamin Norton's winery, Benjamin Norton's old house, Benjamin Norton Bugbee's new house. I'm going, who in the heck has 3 houses on a map? But there was quite a bit of information on that one. But a lot of times those old maps are just, there's a few roads. They'll mention somebody's house here and there, but nothing. But yeah, you just have to keep trolling and look everywhere. There was a question in the back.
We're talking about the rails. My understanding was a lot of the rails got pulled up, went directly into rolling dies which are the T-posts.
Rolling what?
Rolling dies, they take a rail in and go through a set of rolling dies, and they would go in a rail and come out a long string of T-posts that they cut off.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. Just a long piece of, stock.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
Rail stock or?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard that, so I don't know. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that the railroad got to Lincoln and stopped, but what were the planned extensions? Like were they going to create farming communities and use those farming communities to grow crops to use the railroad, or where do they really want to go to?
Well, the original vision was that there was all this mining happening, and Lincoln was at the bottom of the Auburn Ravine. And so Judah actually kind of looked at running a railroad up that way. And Auburn and Placer wanted a railroad really bad. And they actually, the city of Auburn, back in the 1850s, before you become a city, the state had to pass legislation to allow you to incorporate. So they incorporated for the sole purpose of selling bonds to finance the Sacramento, Placer, Nevada Railroad. And that's how that was going to, and that was good because they wanted a railroad up there because it didn't look like the California Central was going to be running up that way. But that railroad got to about King Road up there on Auburn Folsom, and that fell apart. And those rails were, the road was foreclosed on, and those rails were ripped up by Lester Robinson, who was running the Sacramento Valley Railroad, and because he wanted to do a road up to Placerville and over the Sierras. So a lot of these rails were used someplace fairly quickly. Trivia, so there was actually a railroad war on the Sacramento-Placer Nevada Railroad. Some men were hurt and shot as they were pulling up these rails. James McClatchy, the sheriff, actually had to kind of get involved. Did you know McClatchy was a sheriff? Yeah. He left the Sacramento Bee and became elected sheriff, and then he said, "This sucks, I'm out of here." He went back to Sacramento Bee. And to avoid paying the principal and interest on the bonds that the city of Auburn had floated, $50,000, they disincorporated. They got a bill passed to disincorporate themselves. And then several years later, and this is what I find fascinating about this area, how the people are kind of interlinked. Mr. Amos Catlin, very prominent attorney in Sacramento and knows a lot of people in the railroad community, and Mr. Robinson says, I have a bunch of bonds and I kind of, they're kind of defunct, but I would like to redeem them. I know Auburn would like to be incorporated again. Catlin goes to the folks up in Auburn, the movers and the shakers, say, "Hey, I got a deal for you. You want to become a city, but you need to pay off these bonds. You can't become a city just having that hang out there, so let's strike a deal." And so they did, and they were able, I think Robinson got about $9,000 or $10,000 on his $45,000 investment, which was better than nothing, and that cleared up the debt, and Auburn was able to reincorporate itself. So, interesting. Yes?
So did they ever complete enough to actually haul people or produce?
On which one?
The Central.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. No. Yep. Yep. People would ride it, and they were hauling stuff. But the traffic, things just really decreased. There just wasn't as much economic activity in the 60s. Of course, we got the Civil War going on and whatnot. We were kind of in a transition period. There was another question.
Well, I was asking similar, whether the demise of the railroad was due to a lack of activity or competition from others.
Or both.
Yeah, I mean, it was an enterprise just like any other, and they had debts, and they had to try and do their debt service and pay bills, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to run a fully capitalized railroad when the Central Pacific was a subsidized railroad and could kind of operate for less.
So it was the competition.
Yeah, there was, because as soon as the Central Pacific was able to run their line, especially when it got up to Auburn, everything was dead for the Sacramento Valley and the California Central, because that made it. Now, the California Central, that line still continues right there at the Y, the line that goes north to Lincoln, that still is in use. Yeah, from Roseville, I apologize. From Roseville up to Lincoln and beyond, that was the original part of the California Central, and they kept that because that did go north, and there was a stage company that got involved and bought some of it and whatnot, and so where it was suitable, they continued to operate. It's very interesting. I have an image of Benicia in 1853. The feds came out and was looking at a route, a Pacific Railroad route, and they thought it would probably go to Benicia because that would be the area that was easiest to cross the Carquinez Strait and then get down to Oakland. But we have to remember that, I mean, at Sacramento, you could not go east with any sort of confidence year-round because that whole area flooded. We know it's the bypass today, and we have 80 and 5 that go across it. It was always flooded during the winter, so you really couldn't run a railroad over there until they were able to develop some other stuff. But so Sacramento was the end of the line, and that's why Sacramento was so important in the early days to connect all all these foothill communities and all of the new mining that was going on. But there was agricultural products and wine. Mr. Bugby was doing a lot in Champagne and sending it back east. Yes, sir.
Did this company buy any land along the line? And I'm wondering because you kept, talking about the Central Pacific. And the Central Pacific was never really subsidized by the government. I mean, it was floated loan, like interest-free loans by the government. And then given like a 50-50 land swap basically throughout the Great Plains and throughout the whole corridor. So I'm wondering if financing itself, this railroad bought any land along the way, because that's one of the reasons why the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific ended up making so much money. It's because they held on to that land because they didn't have to pay any interest on it, waited for the railroad to be built, and then sold it for a song instead of it being homestead for free.
That's a really, really interesting point. No, they didn't buy land. No one bought land. You just did it. You just built your railroad. I mean, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. And,
clear title anyway.
well, yeah. And so people, a good example, Mr. Bugby in 1861 buys his farm over there in El Dorado County. But all he was buying was kind of some vineyard stock and some outbuildings. But he didn't have any clear title to it until those maps were made, and then he bought it from the state of California, and then he had clear title. And that's what happened to a lot of people. So when they ran the Natoma Canal into the Leidesdorf land grant, the land grants were the only ones that were clearly recognized as being private property, that's when Folsom said, oh, Mr. Catlin, by the way, that's my property. You start paying me, or, I'm going to foreclose on you. And that area right there, 9,000 acres, Catlin bought that in 1856 for $36,000 because he had to. He was forced to. But yeah, you make a really, that's a valid point. And I do not want to overstate my understanding of all the different financial things that went into, but land sales that were granted to the Central Pacific did help shore up.
That's so curious to me that you have about, 15 years there before all the survey crews come out and divvy it up, but between that time you have all the Americans that come over and buy land and mining claims and things like that, Sutter, his fort. But then before that, you had all the Spanish land grants. And then those were supposedly grandfathered in by the Constitution of California, but they weren't. And so you have this 10-year interregnum there between Spanish land law and American land law. And
yes.
Synced up yet. And that's really fascinating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And yeah, the Mexican and Spanish land grants were put in by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and then there were land commissions that went through and adjudicated, and that was one of the issues with the, it doesn't really show here, the Leidesdorf land grant. There were people that thought it shouldn't be as big and whatnot, and that would have, but yeah, there was, whose land is this? I mean, it was just incredible what was going on and people doing what they were doing. And that's what they did back then. But now Orangevale, of course, that was all nice and plotted out, 5-acre parcels. And from the Baldwin Dam Reservoir, had that nice redwood pipe running into and every other tract to supply water, because even then it was a desert half the year, right? And they needed water. And that was one of the gems of Orangevale, is they had water in their backyards. I mean, they were uptown. You guys were uptown. Because Sacramento, that putrid water in Sacramento. It's kind of putrid today too. They were pulling it right out of the river. There was no filtration. It wasn't the good river water that Orangevale had with no bugs in it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
One of the coolest things you had on your website was, it's not Orangevale, but a little park near Woodbridge. There's a base of an old water tower tank.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Perfect for the route that's on there.
Yeah, I haven't been able to document that that was a water tower, but it would make perfect sense for steam engines. There had to be, sometimes they had to fill up the water tank. I have not been able to, specifically say that's what it was. Someone said it was a cattle water tank. Maybe, I don't know.
They don't need to hide the.
Right, right, yeah. So if we could get, better, I don't know, maybe we can find something, but I haven't been able to find anything specifically on a map that said this is where we had a water tender. But we're going to keep looking, because now we're going to be crowdsourcing with the Orange Vale Historical Society. And I'm telling you, that is half the battle. And I'll speak, and someone, like you just mentioned, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about that. Or, oh, I've got this one piece of information, or I got a map, or I do go to these old paper shows, and you get titles and deeds, and it's amazing what's floating around out there. And it's crowdsourcing to put all the little parts of the puzzle together, such as Mr. Amos Catlin, when he was a Superior Court judge, told Mr. Caldwell, stop digging under the city of Folsom for your gold tunnels. No more. There was an injunction, and people of the city of Folsom were ticked at Caldwell because he was burrowing underneath their town because there was drift mining going on. And they have actually found some of the drift mines in Folsom when they built the parking structure. You had to tell Caldwell. I've read that. I'm going, oh yeah, that's fascinating. And actually, Catlin owned 1/5 of the Rancho San Juan. Then he sold it to John Curry, an old law partner. Yes, sir.
I think I saw something about when they condemned the bridge, the railroad bridge, from Folsom over to Ashland. Was there any kind of shenanigans there, or was it just badly?
No, I think it was fairly deteriorated. Yeah, sometimes they would go. I don't remember seeing any official Sacramento County granting the bridge. Maybe it's someplace because the counties would get more involved at granting licenses and whatnot. But in other areas, it was kind of like, well, we don't know. We don't own that land, or it's not our business and whatnot. So yeah, the ferries, the bridges, it was all very interesting.
Is there any evidence of the pilings left over from the?
I haven't found any evidence of any pilings left over from the old bridge, or even any abutments. Yes, sir.
Do you happen to know the exact years that the railroad was in operation?
It would have, they started gradually by 1859, I think, or 1860, they had the bridge completed, so they were running, and they were probably running trains up through about 1860 before it was finally shut down, but pretty much it was from 1860 to 1865.
Okay, so about 5 years. So that bridge didn't really last very long at all.
No.
Was that a steel bridge?
Oh no, wooden truss. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Are there any pictures of the railroad trestle that went across Gold Creek?
On which? Gold Rush Creek? No, I have never seen any. No, no pictures of any of the old railroad bridges, which I think would just be cool. Now there are maps that indicate bridges over it. I've got a 1914 USGS map that before Big Gulch was filled in, and clearly the line across there is that was a bridge before they filled it in. We're done? Okay, well thank you so much. You guys have been a great crowd, yeah! Let's go, Orangevale history.
The street that we live on is Judah Court, and I never thought, I always thought it was biblical.
Oh, maybe it is, but probably not.
I imagine it's...
Yeah, there was the street that went through American River Canyon. That was kind of the primary way you went over there before Greenback was put in.
Kevin, thank you.
You're welcome.
Wasn't that fun? Yes. You're a good first speaker for us. Thank you so very much.
An honest to goodness first speaker.
Yes, we're on the map now. Thank you so much. Ken, thank you for getting us on live. That's exciting. Yes.
Tell us about your books.
I apologize. Can I steal it?
About his books.
Okay. My first book is called Hidden History Beneath Folsom Lake. I did a lot of hiking around in the first drought, 2012 to 2015, saw all this concrete work and all these things. And that's when I started doing a lot of historical research to find out what this was about. It was the water canals, North Fork Ditch and Natoma, and then some of the other different communities. And that's how I tripped across Mr. B. N. Bugbee, who was just a fascinating individual for becoming fairly wealthy, having a good career in law enforcement, the Bugbee Champagne. He commissioned 2 pieces of music, and then he lost it all. And he had to kind of reinvent himself. He had to pull himself out of alcoholism too, and that wasn't easy. And then he did some really very interesting stuff with the Chinese and whatnot, and stayed active for us old guys. In the 70s, he ran for tax collector of Sacramento County and won in 1899. So he died in 1914, and I thought he was a fascinating gentleman. So those are 2 books, and the next one will be about Catlin. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, we were a little bit late. What is your last name and what is your website?
My last name is Knauss. Knauss. My website is insuremekevin.com. The day job is, sometimes not even a day job, is insurance, health insurance, and sometimes it's like a weekend thing, because I'd rather be doing history research. But I'll talk about health insurance if I have to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are your maps and things in there?
Yeah, we'll talk. Yeah.